it's crazy, but it's
You're watching Channel Z, the world's leading zombie apocalypse channel. Broadcasting live from Studio Z.
Makes me act the way I do.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Zombie History, where we explore the buried past. Hope you're ready to unearth some history with us today. Hi, I'm Mzilikazi Koné, and I'm with my co-host, Liz Grumbach.
Hey, Mzilikazi, how are you today?
I'm excellent, Liz. How about yourself?
I'm good. I'm really I'm excited to be here today because we it sounds like we have some different undead stories from our first episode. So what undead stories are we focusing on today?
Yes. Well, in this episode, we are moving from the continent of Africa, where we began with zombie history, and we are traversing across the Atlantic to the Caribbean, right? Thinking through this project of the transatlantic slave trade and what that symbolized to have people brought across the oceans, right? To be enslaved throughout the Caribbean and the Americas, right? So we're moving along. We're moving along this journey to really unpack and explore zombification in the Caribbean and also resistance to zombification in the Caribbean.
That's so good. And, you know, one of the things that I know we chatted about when we were thinking about this episode, right, is that this idea that colonization is on both sides of the Atlantic.
That's
that
right.
that even now there are still colonies, right? And so this kind of like the definition of colonialism for all of our episodes, but maybe especially for this episode, seems really important. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Because often we often are discussed that we are in a post-colonial moment, and for some nations that may be true, and yet there still continue to be colonies in this current moment. There are colonies, and there's resistance to colonization, even in countries that are now post-colonial, right? They were colonies and are no longer colonies. Often have relationships to the former the nation that kind of ruled them, that can be colonial in nature. So we can see some replications of colonial behavior, even in these post-colonial moments here that we have. So colonization is central to this discussion, whether or not we're actually post-colonial, and in addition, the efforts to decolonize, right? To understand these long legacies. Hundreds of years of colonization, and for some nations, being independent and free has really only been a matter of 50, 60, 70 years. So recent independence and much longer histories of colonization. So it remains central here, right, for us to understand and unpack and discuss what that looks like in the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, and I think like what was so exciting to me about this episode and this conversation today, and we'll introduce our guest in just a little while, is that the origin of the Western zombie, as we understand it, has its roots in the Caribbean, and in understanding where the zombie comes from, and where we are now in our process of zombification as a society, is to understand all of these things that you've just unpacked for us. So, like for you, where is that located? Where's the origin of the Western zombie located?
Right. Well, I don't think you can discuss the project of zombification without really centering the nation of Haiti in the conversation. Haiti as the country that becomes the first free Black republic in 1804 after the Haitian Revolution, where Black Haitians, enslaved Haitians, and free Blacks rose up against the colonizers in France, right, and become a free Black republic, right? But what's so central to this freedom in Haiti is that with all of these years of exploitation and slavery, the ways in which the process of slavery acts as a zombification project, right? What does it mean to bring folks and to create this culture of slavery? What does it mean to take folks' names, right? To not allow people to speak their native languages, right? To force a certain religious practice, religion on folks, right? So all of these things add to the process of zombification, of trying to take away oneself, one's culture, language, practice, right? And those things as an effort to zombify the the people, right? So while we might start in Haiti, I would say the project of zombification extends really throughout the Americas, right? If we're discussing slavery as it develops throughout the Americas.
Oh gosh, thank you so much for it. I just feel like you've grounded this episode in a really important way, and thank you. And we are gonna probably pop up this banner that's up right now, and thank you all for. So like slavery is not separate from the project of colonization, and like if we're thinking about slavery and colonization throughout the Americas now as we're moving forward in our episodes, just thank you for grounding it. I know one of the other things that we wanted to talk about though, and this maybe gets closer to the topic of today's episode, is if the zombie is the enslaved person in a certain metaphor, then where are the spaces and the avenues of freedom, of asserting independence, of resistance, of social organizing? What are those? What's kind of central to those things for you?
Sure. Well, thinking through resistance broadly construed, right? And first we might think of actual rebellion, right? Rebellion from slave, plantations and the many rebellions that existed, right? Though they aren't discussed as common history, they exist, right? And these are active moments of pushing back against a system of slavery and colonization. Now, there are other forms of resistance, right? There's the resistance of the everyday, whether that be in slowing down work speed, right? Or resistance within the colonizer's home, right? Spaces of resistance. Now, we might also think about cultural practices as spaces for resistance through song, through dance, through the creation of new ways of speaking and new ways of creating culture that come up in the Americas, right? So bringing in folks, experience and cultures, right? But they create new cultures here. So we can look to these musical forms of resistance, whether it be from Brazil, right? Where we look to the creation of capoeira, right? An Afro-Brazilian martial art grounded in song and music, right? So while to the unknowing eye, you might only be seeing folks who are singing and appear to be dancing, right? But capoeira is also a martial art. It's an act of resistance. It's something that can actually be used in a fight, right? So what appeared to be solely musical and cultural is also resistance as well, right?
I love that. And I love the idea of, like embodied resistance, right? And that music and dance can be a thing that you embody as part of you resisting or like decolonizing your space or something like that. And we have this amazing comment from Erica, loving the idea of resistance and exploring how past and present connect in this episode. And I think that that's something that we're going to draw on quite a bit today. I think maybe now would be an amazing time. This is such a good moment to introduce our guest for today's episode.
Yes, we have an amazing guest today. We have Dr. David Hinds joining us today. Dr. David Hinds is a political scientist, a political commentator, and an activist who's an associate professor of Caribbean and African diaspora studies at Arizona State University. He's an expert in governance and politics in the Caribbean, race, ethnicity, and politics throughout the African diaspora, popular music in the African diaspora, including reggae music, and Black political leadership. We are really excited to have Dr. David Hinds join us today. Hello, we're so pleased to have you. How are you? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Dr. Koné and your co-host for inviting me to be part of your experience today.
Well, we're really grateful to have you here with us. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and ask you this first question, right, in the ways that we're thinking through zombification, okay? In what ways, in the ways that we're discussing zombification and this act of zombification through slavery and colonization, okay, how can music be an anti-zombification tool?
Well, I would think that music is at the center of any anti-zombification process, largely because music is one of the natural reactions of human beings. We speak, and as we speak, we begin to make music. So speech in itself is music. And so therefore, we're talking about something that is natural to human beings. And if you are going to zombify me, then my natural reaction is to de-zombify myself. And in doing so, I call on all of my faculties. I call on my speech, I call on my movement, I call on my ability to project. And so therefore, music is part of all of that. And it plays an important role in survival of zombification, and it obviously plays an even more important role in de-zombifying. Professor Rex Nettleford, a Caribbean scholar, said when people are oppressed, they retreat to a place where the oppressor cannot find them. And it is from that place that comes this musical form of de-zombification. David Rodder, a calypso singer from the Caribbean, talks about retreating and going deep within my Caribbean belly. And so therefore, music is very important. And if I may say, our foreparents brought their music with them from Africa, and they held on to it. It was one of the things that survived the onslaught of slavery and colonialism. You couldn't take that away from them. As Professor Nettleford says, they go deep in a place where the oppressor cannot find them. Out of that comes the resistant language, the language of identity. And so therefore, it is no accident that music is pivotal to the project of anti-slavery, anti-colonialism, and even in the post-colonial process that we today call globalization, which, and I go to Nettleford again, which Nettleford says is nothing but a new designation for an old obscenity.
No, that's an excellent point there. And I'm really focusing in on this part of going within, right, as a form of resistance, right? And also the way this is kind of out-facing as well, right? Music can be out-facing even to the colonizers without necessarily cueing that it's a anti-colonial music or in resistance to the state in which folks are in throughout slavery. So it's kind of like that dual side, that internal resistance, but also that outward facing through that musical form.
Yes, you're quite right. And of course, we're talking here about the creative intellect. If one is oppressed, one calls on the creative intellect more than normal. And it is out of that creative intellect that comes the creative imagination. Creative imagination. So in the Caribbean, by Western standards, the Caribbean is not developed. We don't have a lot of skyscrapers and big bridges and all of those things we see in the first world. But what they have is their creative imagination. And that is why the Caribbean could produce musicians at the level of Bob Marley, who's perhaps the greatest musical talent that the world has created in the 20th century. And we know of all the others, Mighty Sparrow, in Calypso, because of our ability to imagine. You're oppressed, you're imagining freedom. And so the creative imagination is central to the Caribbean.
That's right. Wow. Well, I think thinking through these kind of musical interventions here, what do you think, Liz?
Yeah, I there were just so many things. Just Dr. Hinds, thank you for being here. I mean, I'm really struck by music as a resistance language. It's the language of identity. It's imagining these futures. And we have a couple of comments I just want to bring in that, Erica is commenting about capoeira and resistance as a means of dealing with trauma and as a means of healing. And, that's also resistance, right? It's taking that time to deal with your trauma, to heal yourself, to heal your community as this embodied group connection and how that has a powerful impact on community. And then then we have Pamela in comments too that's saying that like music is a great way, I think, to trace the diaspora. And we haven't talked about I think always in zombie history we're talking about the African diaspora, right? And we're talking about that as a community. And I just wanted to bring those comments in to maybe cue our next segment, right? Which is I think about what these types of music are doing for us. So Dr. Koné, if you wanted to introduce the song that we have upcoming next, that would be amazing.
Yes, that's great. I'd love to. So we're gonna share a small clip here by the artist Burning Spear. The song is called Slavery Days and is featured on the 1975 album named Marcus Garvey, another important famous Caribbean figure here. So let's check out this clip from.
So do you remember the days of slavery? So do you remember the days of slavery? And the beat us, the beat us. And they work us so hard. They use us.
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Burning Spear. So I want to ask you, Dr. Hinds, are musical forms of writing like those that lead up to reggae, like mento, ska, and of course reggae, are they signaling resistance to colonialism?
Oh, yes, certainly. One has to center three functions of music. As one look at the music of the Caribbean, we know of the function that is universal to all people, and that is the function of celebration. Music to party, music to dance. But in the Caribbean, I want to cite three functions of music. One, historical memory, which you heard there from Burning Spear. Second, affirmation of identity. And third, resistance and protest. Now, historical memory is important because remember, we are cut off from Africa. We are cut off from our source of humanity, so to speak. And so therefore, we have to have a project of reconnecting to that history. And historical memory is one in which we do that. And we have to do that through slavery because there was an African world before slavery. And so therefore slavery becomes a gateway. So when you hear Caribbean singers, whether it's Burning Spear, do you remember the days of slavery? Or Bob Marley, Slave Driver, or the Mighty Sparrow, I Am a Slave. What they're doing there is taking us in 2021, 2020, back to the slave plantation and using that experience of the slave plantation to connect the stories in Africa. And so therefore historical memory becomes important. And connected to that is affirmation of identity. That's part of what slavery and colonialism did, was to rupture our African identity. And so therefore, as human beings, we have to affirm our identity. That is why we say, I am Black, I'm proud, I'm beautiful, because what enslavement and colonialism and zombification did is to say that we are Black and ugly without an history and without an identity, because we were not human beings, we are commodities. And so what the music does is that it helps us to form that identity. We're Caribbean, but we are Caribbean people who hail from Africa. And there is something about bringing that our Caribbeanness with our Africanness together that makes for a beautiful identity that will help us to navigate our way forward in a hostile world that don't need islands anymore. And then finally, resistance and protest. Resistance is constant, always must be constant, because you're human, and to be human is to be part of the resistance culture that is constant. And so we are always resisting because we are trying to catch up in a world that left us on the slave plantation. When the colonials left and they're gone, the zombies are left there, and we now have to de-zombify ourselves.
That's
And
right.
so that's where our music comes in, because our music becomes this outlier. It becomes this thing that goes out to the world and says, yes, we may be third world, we may be underdeveloped, all those things that you call us, but we are human. And when it comes to the creative imagination, we are equal to all human beings.
That's right. I see that sense of of not only the resistance but the affirming of one's own humanity, and that musical tradition is, it's doing that inward work, right? I am a human. It takes me back to seeing these signs of folks marching, right, here in the U.S. in the 1960s, that I am a man, trying to in fact affirm that one is human. And then beyond that, as you wrote, right, the kind of bringing in the memory, bringing in this historical memory. It's almost like not forgetting where we come from, or the experiences experienced by Black people in the Americas. Really thoughtful points here, Dr. Hinds. Let me go ahead and follow up and ask you, since we began here with Burning Spear and you've discussed some other artists already, can you tell us what we might find on your own resistance playlist? Are there a few artists or songs that we ought to check out for your resistance playlist?
Oh yeah, we're in the month of October, and we're celebrating Mr. Columbus, that man who is celebrated as a great explorer. Well, for us in the Caribbean, Columbus is a damn liar. The mighty shadow, Columbus damn lie. He didn't tell us that he had to run from the Apaches. He's a coward. He come and tell us that he discovered the Caribbean, but people were here in the Caribbean before. He's a liar. Or the Burning Spear also has a song on Columbus. So what we are doing, what the artists are doing in those songs about Columbus is that they are correcting history. They are correcting the narrative of colonialism, because Columbus is central to the colonial project, right? But Columbus was responsible for genocide in the Caribbean, the genocide of the native Indians that he met there. He's responsible for slavery because it was out of his quest, the European quest for wealth, that the Atlantic slave trade comes into being, right? And so there's this narrative that Columbus is responsible for where we are today. Well, he's responsible in a negative way. And our artists reflect that. Now, what we have to say about reggae and calypso, these are musics that come from the working class, the ordinary people. We're not talking about lettered people. We're not talking about scholars. We're talking about men and women who observe life's experience, who read about history and bring it to bear in their creative imagination through music. And so Columbus becomes a target of de-zombification. All the zombies that we're talking about, they in the Caribbean, they are surrounding Mr. Columbus. He is at the center of the zombies in the Caribbean. So therefore, it's no accident that our musicians take aim at him.
Okay.
I had to come back just to like snap. I mean, yes, exactly. Thank you. And thank you to everybody that's commenting with your resistance playlist too. I think like this is the space to like identify who's at the center of the zombification process, and like to kind of think about, like, crack open why these things are on our resistance playlists, why they inspire us. And we have this question from Athena in the comments. Dr. Octopus, thank you for being here. I know that you're on the run from zombies right now. We hope that you're safe in Europe. But as a dancer and musician, Athena knows that music and dance can zombify us too by getting us in sync with people around us, right? So how does that kind of that good force of zombification, and I think here it's more like, how does that building force of resistance or community that that getting in sync with people, how can we use those forces for good? Basically, how do these things inspire in us resistance and put figures like Columbus at the center? So Dr. Hinds, I wonder if you have any ideas for us.
Well, yes, certainly. If one is part of a space that was at the center of zombification, I would suggest that in October we go look for Columbus and bring him and say, show me the dead bodies, show me the zombies, because he knows where they are. And I'm making reference here to European society, is that European society has a responsibility to help us to find the zombies. And help us to extricate them from our present existence. And so therefore, music becomes that instrument that can bring us together. So the hard work is done by the Caribbean, by Africa, but then it puts that music on the world stage, and it helps the descendants of Columbus to come to grips with their own past. You see, everybody likes the rhythm of reggae, the rhythm of calypso, and one is drawn to that. And as you come to the rhythm, you encounter the lyrics, you encounter Bob Marley, who said, Africa, unite for your children because they want to come back home. The Back to Africa movement. Why are we going back to Africa? Because according to Bob Marley, we are running from Babylon. And so the de-Babylonizing of the Caribbean, the de-zombification of the Caribbean is the responsibility of all human beings, including those who occupy the European spaces. And so the music, the rhythm of the music can become the introduction to this holding of our hands across the oceans, across the water. And as we hold our hands and we dance to the rhythm, we discover the scathing lyrics, the biting lyrics of de-zombification. And I think if we were to do that through the education process, some of us are doing it. Dr. Koné, Liz, we're all doing it in the university. We have to begin to do it in the high schools, in the middle schools, so that music is not just entertainment. Music is not just to get high on something external, but music must move us to get high on something that is intrinsic to our historical march.
That's right.
And I just feel like you spoke to this question that we got earlier from Pamela. What do you think about the current educational trends, like limiting the teaching of history, and how that is a kind of zombification in the way that we've been talking about it, right? And I think you just answered that, right? Is that we have to resist against that trend that limits that teaching.
And if music brings you in to kind of move, right, that's the thing that gets you moving, then it's the lyrics that takes you to a mental other place, right? The lyrics can act as that de-zombification part.
Yes, and let me just stick this point because it's a very important question. The music then becomes guerrilla activity. Because if you don't want to teach critical race theory in the classroom, then you can go to any reggae music, reggae artist, or any calypso artist, and you will find critical race theory in the music. So the music becomes the guerrilla. You hide, you continue to zombify our humanity by locking us out of teaching critical race theory inside of the classrooms. But we have a larger classroom. The mighty joke, a calypsonian from the Caribbean said, teach the children, teach the children. And the calypso, the reggae music, the merengue, the African-American jazz and blues and hip hop, they all become spaces of guerrilla warfare.
Yes. Thinking about this guerrilla activism. Okay. I want to cue up a song, and Dr. Hinds, you mentioned this, right? You mentioned Bob Marley's Africa Unite. This song was released in 1979 on the album Survival. And let's hear a clip about what Bob is saying to us here in Africa Unite.
How good and how pleasant it would be before God and man to see the unification of all Africans. Marcus Garvey said it, so let it be done. I know you know who you are under the sun. We are the children of the Rasta man. We are the children of the Lion. So Africa unite, Africans united, unite for the benefit of your people, 'cause we're moving.
Yes. And hearing that, right? What does it mean to, as a person who grew up in the Caribbean, right? As a part of the African diaspora, talking about Africa uniting, right? And where does it include, thinking through Africa and the people of the African diaspora in the Caribbean as connected to that call of Africa Unite? Dr. Hinds, I wonder if you could just comment on this. I know we've talked about, these spaces of resistance, and also in terms of your expertise throughout the Caribbean and thinking through culture in the Caribbean. How do these African cultural retentions, like reggae here, provide these spaces for the resistance in the whole diaspora, including back in Africa? Oh, you're muted. Wait, you're muted. There you go.
I'm muted.
You got it.
Yeah. The last part of your question there is so instructive. How can the diaspora help to revive even Africa itself? Bob Marley is singing that song in 1979, 1 year before the Zimbabwe independence. Zimbabwe is winning their independence after decades of struggle against apartheid. And Bob Marley will be invited in 1980 to that independence as that independence celebration in Zimbabwe. And he would sing a twin song to Africa Unite, Zimbabwe. Every man got right to decide his own destiny. And I'm here so that I want to save my people from being contrary. I want to save my people from being mercenaries. And so here is a Caribbean man speaking to Africa and with Africa as an African, the Pan-African Project. The Pan-African Project, which is so central to the de-zombification, because you see, the zombification was not a zombification of Jamaica or Barbados or Guyana or Brazil or African American spaces. It was a zombification of African peoples. And so the de-zombification has to be a broader project beyond Jamaica, beyond Mississippi, beyond St. Lucia. It has to be a Pan-African project. So Bob Marley is echoing that. But he's also saying Marcus Garvey at the turn of the 20th century called that back to Africa sense. And for Garvey and the other back to Africa people, it was not only physical back to Africa, but mental back to Africa, connecting to our people through music and through dance. So part of the connecting for brothers and sisters across the diaspora and in Africa is the music. Today, we have reggae music influencing hip-hop. Reggae music influencing high life music and other new musical forms in Africa. Reggae music influencing our brothers and sisters in the Latin American, African diaspora with reggaeton. And so the music, this reggae music, the latest Black music in the 20th century. It was only born in the early 1950s. It's serving as a unification, as a form of unification, as a unifying tool for African people everywhere. So yes, the music holds us to account. Every time we go into our car and we turn on that music and we hear the lyrics and we hear the rhythm, it reminds us that this project of decolonization is constant. Post-colonialism suggests something definite and finished, but the decolonization is a process. And reggae music, as we're talking about it, is decolonization music. It is born in the early 1950s as the Caribbean is preparing for independence. Is beaten up in the Second World War. It can no longer maintain its colonies. The Caribbean and other spaces coming from their independence. Big signals called self-government. And the self-government is as if all that language that was locked up in the Caribbean belly came out. And it first came out as celebratory music and dance. And then it morphed and became rocksteady. And then rocksteady lasted for 18 months, 18 glorious months. And then from rocksteady, we get into what we call today reggae, the most resistant, well, overtly resistant iteration of the larger Jamaica and reggae music. But the music is moving as our people are moving, as our people move and discover new avenues of reclaiming our humanity, reclaiming our history. The music is there because the music is natural. It's natural. Right. It's not imposed. Right. It's not imposed by colonialism. It's not imposed by slavery. It comes out of the process that says we are human beings too.
That's right. Ultimately affirming the humanity of each and every one, right? Dr. Hinds, what a pleasure it is to have you. Let's ask, do you have any closing thoughts?
I'm excited. I'm excited about this project, as I'm excited when I see young scholars finding new ways of speaking to the new generation, molding new minds. That freedom is not here yet in its finality. There are freedom spaces. And that if we think creatively of how to use those spaces to get our people, we complain that the young people today are elusive. But they have to be, because they live in an elusive world and they too are grappling of how to engage with this world. And they've discovered the power of music. And as soldiers of de-zombification, we have to get close to them and use their medium to disseminate knowledge, use their medium in this process of de-zombification so that they themselves would be relinquished from the hold of modern day zombification.
What amazing final thoughts, Dr. Hinds. I feel like thinking about these spaces of resistance and ourselves, and also the music and the way that you've described it as tools to embody those spaces. I know I'm very, very grateful. And Mzilikazi?
That's right. I also feel the same. Thank you, Dr. Hinds. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this live stream and staying along with us. We appreciate that. We thank you, and we'll see you next month. But until then, don't be a zombie. Know your history. Take care.
It's crazy, but it seems so logical. I can't deny that there is something something supernatural with you.